I'm a backcountry search and rescue cartographer. In 2004, I tracked missing hikers into a valley that shouldn't exist, camouflaged huts, silent patrols, and giants who signaled like soldiers. I lived in their hidden village for 11 years. I won't show proof because it would summon the people hunting them. But what did they fear most? From the sky? The first thing you need to understand is that I didn't go looking for legends. I went looking for people. Late September 2004, three college kids overdue from a loop trail that everybody does in a weekend. The forecast flipped: cold rain, low cloud, early dark. I was on the volunteer search and rescue roster, and on weekdays, I drew maps for timber crews. I knew that range the way some men know their own house. We staged at a gravel turnout under a flapping canopy. Names on a whiteboard, last known point, timestamps. I checked my pack by habit: headlamp, spare batteries, rain shell, fire kit sealed dry, water plus a filter, compass, a battered GPS that hated thick canopy, a small first aid roll, whistle, and a cheap handheld radio that mostly loved static. We split into teams. Mine was two: me and a deputy who'd hiked plenty but didn't like being out after sundown. We started at the trailhead sign with a cheerful map that made the forest look tidy instead of wet and endless. For the first hour, everything was ordinary: mud, ferns, rain on leaves. We called out names, paused to listen, called again. The deputy kept glancing at his phone like signal might appear if he stared hard enough. Then I saw the first thing that didn't fit: a boot print in the mud, size 11 or 12, fresh, sharp tread, but it angled off the trail into hemlock where the ground dropped away. Hikers don't do that unless they're panicking, lost, or following something. I crouched. Next to it, half a pace away, was a second impression: longer, wide at the front, bare of tread. Not a hoof, too heavy, pressed into the mud like a hand, or a foot that didn't belong to a human. Deer, the deputy said, because that's what people say when they don't want to think. Deer don't step like that, I answered. Protocol still mattered. Mark it, photograph it, note coordinates. My GPS blinked, hunted, finally gave me numbers. I wrote them down, sealed the page in a zip bag like the paper could drown. As we pushed on, the trail began to feel wrong. Switchbacks that should have climbed stayed level. A drainage that should have run below us whispered to our right. My compass pointed north, but the landscape felt rotated, as if someone had turned the ridge while we weren't looking. By mid-afternoon, the rain eased into mist. Sound carried farther. That's when we heard it. One clear, deliberate knock. Not a random crack. A pace strike against wood. I raised a hand. We listened. Another knock. Same distance, same tempo, like a signal. Woodpecker, the deputy offered. Woodpeckers don't keep time, I said. We called out again, louder. No answer. Only that measured tapping, moving ahead of us without getting closer, as if it knew exactly how fast we walked. A mile later, we found the second anomaly. Someone had built a low shelter just off the trail, saplings bent into an arch and woven with boughs so neatly it looked braided. The entrance faced away from the wind. The floor was lined with dry needles, fresh as if someone had fluffed them minutes ago. No wrappers, no cans, no human mess. Inside, tucked under the needles, was a strip of bright orange survey tape, the kind we used to mark cut lines. It had been torn into thin ribbons and knotted together like a bracelet. That tape didn't belong to the missing hikers. It belonged to my world. The deputy backed away, suddenly pale. That's recent. I nodded. And the forest did something I'd never felt it do before. It went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that happens when every bird and squirrel has agreed, for reasons you don't get to know, to hold its breath. My radio hissed once, then died. I stared at the careful weaving, at the orange knots, and I realized we weren't tracking lost kids anymore. We were being guided. We moved on anyway, slower now. 10 minutes past the shelter, I noticed marks on the trunks. 3 slashes, then a gap, then three again, always on the uphill side. Not random trailblazes, warnings. The deputy whispered that it felt like we'd crossed into somebody's yard, and for once I didn't argue. On the ground, small cairns of river rock appeared where no creek ran, as if the earth itself had been mapped in secret now. If this is gripping you, subscribe, hit like, and comment what you do right here. Turn back with the coordinates, or step off the trail and follow the knocking deeper, because that's exactly when my compass needle shivered, and pointed the wrong way. We left the shelter and stepped off the friendly lie of the trail. I flagged the spot with a twig and a stone the way old-timers do when they don't want plastic tape in the woods. The deputy wanted to call it in. I tried my radio again. Dead. No squelch, no crackle, just silence like the handset had been packed with cotton. Mist thickened between the trunks. Visibility dropped to 30 yards, then 20. Every time I checked my GPS, the screen hesitated, then threw up a wandering arrow that didn't match my compass. I trusted the needle more than the satellite, but even the needle felt uncertain, twitching as if it couldn't decide what north meant under this canopy. The knocking came again, not ahead now, but to our left. Two strikes. Pause. One strike. It sounded like a code you'd learn if you grew up here. Maybe it's them, the deputy said. Hope can make any sound into a voice. Maybe, I lied, because I needed his feet moving. We pushed through wet salal and sword fern down a shallow grade. The ground changed. Less duff, more packed clay, like it had been walked 100 times. Branches at shoulder height were snapped clean, not torn, and every so often I saw those 3 slashes on bark, fresh cuts that shone pale against dark wood. A half hour in, I found the first real sign of the missing kids, a granola bar wrapper pinned under a rock, placed there on purpose so wind wouldn't take it. That wasn't panic. That was someone trying to be found. But the wrapper was dry. Too dry for a day of mist and rain. I looked up. Above us, the hemlock limbs knitted together so tight they formed a roof. Under that roof, the air stayed almost still. Someone had chosen this route because it hid you from the sky. We reached a narrow saddle where 2 ridges met, and that's where the line was. It wasn't a fence. It wasn't a gate. It was a change in the world. On our side, ferns and brush. On the far side, the undergrowth was trimmed back, not cleared, but braided and pressed down as if a giant palm had brushed it flat. The trees on the far side leaned inward, their lower branches interlocked like fingers. You could walk through if you knew the angle. If you didn't, you'd snag and curse and leave hair and cloth behind. The deputy stopped. I don't like this. Neither did I. And still, my feet carried me forward, because I could feel it now, the presence of pattern, of intention. Not a predator's randomness, but a plan. We ducked through the interlocked branches. The moment we crossed, my compass needle swung hard, then settled on a heading that made no sense with the terrain. The deputy swore softly and slapped his own compass like it was broken. Both needles agreed, and that was worse. We made camp before full dark because you don't stumble in unknown country at night unless you want to die. Procedure: pick high ground, avoid deadfall, keep water close, but not in a drainage that could flash. We found a knoll under a cedar with a view down into a shallow bowl. No fire, no bright light. Headlamps only when necessary, red mode when possible. Dinner was cold jerky and a handful of trail mix. I filtered water fast, listening between each squeeze. The forest stayed quiet, but the quiet had layers now, like someone was breathing behind it. Sometime after midnight, the deputy nudged me awake. His eyes were wide. He pointed. Across the bowl between trunks, something pale moved. Not white, more like fog catching shape. It stopped where a normal animal would have kept going. Then, very calmly, it stepped into a patch of moonlight and I saw the outline. Tall, broad, and standing on 2 legs. I froze. The figure didn't charge. It didn't roar. It simply raised an arm and made a slow, deliberate gesture. 3 fingers extended, then closed. 3 slashes. A warning. I eased my knife out, not to fight, just to keep my hand busy. The deputy's fingers clamped my sleeve. We listened for footfalls, for brush snapping. Nothing. Whoever stood across that bowl knew how to move without noise. A smell drifted in, wet earth cedar resin, and a musky note like an old barn after rain. My mind tried to label it bear and failed. Bears don't braid paths. Bears don't leave warnings. It kept its eyes on me, like it understood who was choosing. Then it stepped back into the trees and the darkness seemed to close around it from the inside. I could feel it measuring my next move. Then the knocking started again, but this time it came from behind us. The knocking behind us wasn't random. It was close enough that I could feel it in my teeth. Wood against wood, measured, patient, like someone tapping a nail without a hammer. I sat up slow and raised an open hand toward the darkness. The deputy's breathing turned shallow. In the bowl below, the tall shape didn't return. Instead, a second presence drifted at the edge of our camp, just outside the headlamp's weak spill. Then came the sound that ended every argument in my head. A soft exhale, almost a sigh, followed by the faint clack of something hard. Stone? Set down carefully. I clicked my light to red and swept it low. 2 pale eyes reflected for a heartbeat. Not bright like a deer, but duller. as if the surface absorbed light instead of throwing it back. A silhouette filled the space between two cedars, massive shoulders, a head that sat forward, arms hanging longer than mine. I didn't reach for my knife. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing that ever calms a frightened animal: food, a strip of jerky. I held it in my palm like an offering and set it on a flat rock between us. Silence. A hand. No, not a hand, but something with fingers, extended from the shadow. The nails were short and dark, the skin thick, and the motion was controlled. It didn't snatch. It didn't hesitate. It took the jerky and withdrew. The deputy whispered, "It's a bear." "No," I whispered back, because the way it moved wasn't hunger. It was assessment. A second later, another shape appeared to the right, half hidden behind a trunk. Smaller. Still huge, but leaner. Its head tilted, listening. I felt like I'd walked into the middle of a conversation and didn't speak the language. The first one stepped forward until it stood at the edge of our little knoll. I could smell it now: wet bark, musk, and something sharp like crushed spruce. It lowered its head and made a sound that wasn't a roar, not even close. It was a low pulse, almost musical, like a throat pushing air through a narrow space. Then it lifted one arm and pointed, not at us, but past us, uphill. Another knock answered from that direction. Two strikes. Pause. One. The same code. It wanted us to move. Protocol screamed at me. Don't follow unknown subjects. Don't abandon your bivvy. Don't separate from your team. But this wasn't a person we could command with a badge or a radio. This was the forest giving orders in a voice that didn't care if we understood. I stood slowly, palms open. The deputy shook his head hard, but he stood too, because fear makes followers. I packed in silence, moving fast, minimizing noise. No zipper snags, no metallic clinks. Every sound felt like a mistake. The bigger one backed away as we moved, never turning its back, guiding us with distance. The smaller one ghosted along the flank, a presence more than a body. When we reached the interlocked branches, the hidden seam in the ridge, the bigger one stopped and did something that snapped my attention like a slap. It touched the bark where the three slashes were cut, then dragged its fingers down in one long line, deeper than the marks, fresh sap beating instantly. Then it pressed its palm against my chest, just a firm shove, not violent, and pointed upward again. Sky. A faint thrum rolled through the canopy, too steady to be wind. I felt it in my ribs. The deputy heard it too. His eyes went wide as he mouthed a single word: helicopter. But no search helicopter flew this far, this late, without calling in. We moved. Up through the seam, along a path that wasn't a path unless you knew where to place your feet. The ground was packed, dry under the needles. Branches were braided overhead, forming a tunnel. Above that, the thrum grew louder, then faded, then returned like a slow circle. And then, between trunks ahead, I saw it. A cluster of shapes tucked into the hollow of the next ridge. Huts that looked like fallen logs until you focused. Roofs layered in moss, walls woven and sealed with mud. Smoke-free, lightless, invisible from above. A village, hiding in plain forest. The bigger one paused at the threshold and turned its head toward me as if waiting for an oath I didn't know how to speak. From inside the village, something small and dark stepped out, no taller than my shoulder, and in its hands it held a bright strip of orange tape, tied to my missing search flag. It raised the tape as warning, and I realized hikers had been here, and someone decided what I was allowed to take back. The child, if that word even fit, stood perfectly still. Dark, wiry fur clung in wet strands, and its eyes tracked me the way a ranger tracks a stranger near a fire line. It didn't bare teeth. It didn't panic. It simply held up my own flagging tape like a badge, then turned the knot so I could see the twist I'd used that morning. The larger one made a quiet downward chuff. Not anger, more like easy. I took one step, slow, heel first. The child retreated without turning, sliding back into the shadow of a hut. That was my first lesson. They didn't run. They repositioned. Up close, the logs were architecture. Walls were lattice saplings, packed with clay, then faced with sheets of bark so the seams vanished. Roofs were layered, cedar bough, then moss, then more bough. Water shedding, heat holding, and from above indistinguishable from ground. The village sat in a shallow bowl that funneled wind away and swallowed sound. No smoke, no firelight, no smell of cooking. Instead, there were cold pits lined with stone, cache holes. Food stored like a people who'd learned that warmth attracts the wrong kind of attention. The deputy whispered, How many? I counted shapes, movement, silhouettes behind woven screens. 8, 12, more. Not a pack. A community. The smaller guide, leaner, quick, tapped my shoulder with 2 fingers, then pointed at my pack. The gesture was so clear it made my stomach tighten. They wanted to know what I carried. I eased the straps off and set the pack down, unbuckling it with exaggerated care. I laid items out on a flat slab as if I were checking in at a border: headlamp, compass, filter, first aid roll, radio. When I placed the radio down, the big one's head snapped toward it, instantly alert. It reached out and pressed the power button. Nothing. It tried again, then rotated the antenna with a practiced twist that told me it had done this before. It handed it back with a soft grunt that felt like a verdict. Useless here. Then it surprised me. It pointed to my compass, then to its own chest, then to the sky. A sequence. Me. Direction. Above. The deputy shifted, and a dozen eyes shifted with him. I raised my hand and flattened it, palm down, the universal slow down. The tension eased by a fraction. They led us between huts along lanes that weren't lanes until you noticed the ground, packed, swept, free of loose sticks that could snap. Every trip had been rehearsed for silence. On one wall, I saw the first writing. Not letters, etched grooves filled with dark resin, repeating patterns of 3 slashes and circles in long lines. The same warning marks from the ridge, but organized like a map key. The child appeared again, braver now, and touched the pattern with a fingertip, then pointed at me, then at the forest edge. It was asking, "Do you understand?" I didn't. Not yet. Inside the largest hut, the air was warmer, held by layers of hide and bark. A stone shelf ran along the back, and on it lay objects that made my throat go dry: a snapped pocket knife, a metal spoon, a cracked camera lens, a hiking buckle. Human things, saved, cataloged, not as trophies, but as records. And then they showed me their archive. Strips of bark, smoothed and dried, stacked like pages. On each, charcoal drawings, ridgelines, rivers, stick figures, and towering shapes with long arms. Some drawings had little circles above them with lines radiating out, sun, lights. Then, on newer pages, the circles were replaced by a dark shape with blades, a helicopter. The big one set a page in front of me. It showed the valley from above in a thin line, our trail, ending at the seam. Next to it was a symbol I hadn't seen before: an open eye drawn under a crescent. It tapped the eye. Then it tapped my chest. Then it pressed one thick finger to its own lips. From outside, the distant thrum returned, closer now, and the entire hut seemed to hold its breath with us. A ripple moved through the village, silent signals, fingers flicking, bodies turning into shadows. The child slipped to my side and pressed something into my palm, a smooth river stone carved with that open eye. Keep. Remember. Don't show. Outside, the thrum dipped and circled. A blade chop pulse hammered the air. For one split second, a pale searchlight lanced through the canopy, then vanished. Then came a new sound, close enough to freeze my blood. Boots on rock. Human boots dot. The big one covered my compass with its hand, then traced the eye symbol, warning me. Boots on rock in a place that had no trail. The deputy's hand found my arm and squeezed hard enough to hurt. I could feel his whole body vibrating with the urge to bolt. The big one, my mind kept trying to name him, to make him less impossible, tilted his head and listened, eyes half lidded, reading the forest the way I read contour lines. Another crunch. A muted clink, metal on stone. Not a hiker, not a lost kid, someone with gear. The big one pointed at the bark pages again, faster now, then slapped the drawing of the rotor shape with 2 fingers. The sound was soft, but the meaning landed like a shout. This is why we hide. He flipped to an older page. On it, a tall figure lay on the ground, limbs spread, while smaller human shapes stood around it. One held a long stick, another held a box with a bright circle. The tall figure's eyes were drawn as empty ovals. He flipped again. Another page. A cage. Another. A line of humans with packs moving uphill. Another. The same open eye symbol, now crossed through. I swallowed. "They hunt you," I whispered, even though I didn't know if words mattered. The big one touched his chest, then touched mine, then drew an invisible line between us with one long finger. You and me. Same danger. Outside, the village moved without sound. There was no panic, just choreography. Shapes slid between huts. Hands passed bundles. Children were guided into the darkest pockets under roots and rock shelves. The lanes emptied as if everyone had simply remembered an appointment somewhere else. The lean one tapped my pack, then the deputy's, then made a sweeping motion that meant, take nothing that shines. He plucked the reflective strip from the deputy's shoulder strap with a quick tug and shoved it into a clay jar like it was a live ember. The deputy stared, offended, until another boot crunch sounded, closer, and his face changed from pride to fear. A woman's voice carried faintly through the trees. Keep eyes up. If they spook, tag the route. Tag. Route. Words from my world, but wrong in her mouth. The big one led us out the back of the hut into a narrow trench lined with ferns, like a drainage that had been trained. The earth under it was packed hard, and the walls were brushed with boughs to erase scuffs. Above, woven limbs made a ceiling. From 10 feet away, it was just forest mess. From inside, it was a corridor. He pressed my palm flat against the wall. The clay was cool and gritty. In it were faint impressions, prints made long ago. Finger marks, hand marks, small ones. A family signature pressed into mud. Then he pointed upward again. The thrum deepened. A rotor wash tremor fluttered leaves. For a moment, the canopy glowed, not with light, but with movement, the whole forest flexing under invisible pressure. I caught a glimpse through a gap. Gray belly of a helicopter, sliding slow, hunting. A second sound followed it, a sharp electronic chirp, like a bird that didn't belong here. The lean one froze, head snapping toward the chirp. His lips pulled back, not in aggression, but in something I recognized too well. Alarm. He darted forward and dug at the ground with his fingers, fast and precise. He pulled up a palm-sized disc wrapped in mesh, a tiny blinking dot half hidden under needles. A beacon. He crushed it between his hands. The chirp died. In the quiet that followed, I heard the boots again, now angled toward us. The big one looked at me. Not pleading, evaluating. He reached into a niche in the clay wall and drew out a flat slate-like stone etched with lines. A map. A route out. Then he made the simplest gesture in the world. He pointed downhill, towards the seam, then pointed deeper into the village corridor, then held up one finger and one thumb, opening and closing them like a clamp. Choice. Leave now and carry the secret alone. Or stay. Close your life around it and help them keep the clamps shut. The helicopter drifted nearer, and a thin beam of light began to probe the canopy above us, searching for the one gap nobody had sealed yet. The deputy's mouth worked, no sound. He looked at me like I had an answer, like a badge on my chest could make this normal. I didn't. All I had was the weight of that carved eye stone in my pocket and the realization that if we ran, we'd drag a spotlight and a search team straight into their home. A twig snapped directly over our heads. A male voice murmured, "Hold," so close I felt his breath shake needles above. Right there. The word hold didn't belong in this valley. It was spoken like an order to a dog, low, certain. Needles trembled above us. A flashlight beam scraped the underside of the canopy. The big one pressed me down and slid forward into the trench shadow. The lean one vanished to my right. The deputy tried to rise, panic glazed, and I yanked him back. He made a small, wet sound. Boots crunched again. Close. Then stopped. Tag it, a woman whispered. If we lose them, we lose the route. They weren't searching for hikers. They were searching for a way in. My pack felt like a flare in my mind. If we ran, we'd carve a bright line through the forest their helicopter could follow straight to the bowl. The big one eased back to me and held up the slate map. He touched his chest, touched mine, and made the clamp gesture again. Close it. Keep it shut. Then he pointed toward the seam, out, and shook his head once. Not now. I understood in a brutal, simple way. Leaving tonight would lead them here. I nodded. His shoulders sank a fraction, like a man exhaling after carrying weight too long. He placed his palm against my sternum, firm but careful, and guided me deeper through the covered corridor. Behind us, the boots shifted. A man muttered, "Nothing." Another answered, "Keep moving." The beam swept past the trench mouth and didn't find us. When the rotor thrum finally drifted away, the whole valley seemed to breathe again. Morning came gray. The village reassembled itself the way fog becomes a river, quietly, in sections. Bundles unwrapped. Lanes reformed under sweeping hands and silent feet. They didn't celebrate. They counted. An older female, silvered at the temples, moved down the line like a foreman, checking each doorway. When she reached me, she studied my boots and my hands. Then she tapped my mouth once and held up the carved eye stone I'd been given. Remember, don't speak. The deputy lasted 3 days. He stopped eating. He tried to walk back toward the seam twice, only to be redirected without force, like a child steered away from traffic. The third night, he woke from a dream and bolted. I chased him through braided lanes, whispering his name, begging him to be quiet. He made it 50 yards before three dark shapes rose from the brush and blocked him. He swung his arms wild. One caught his wrists and held him like you hold someone you don't want to hurt. The deputy spat, sobbed, then went limp, emptied by fear. In the morning, the elder female led me to the archive hut. She laid out bark pages and with charcoal drew my face, crude but unmistakable, beside the open eye symbol. Then she drew a line from my face to the seam and crossed it out. Not yet. Weeks blurred into a different kind of time. I learned their rules the way you learn weather, by watching consequences. No fire except in stone pits under wet hides, no metal shine, no straight paths a lens could read from above, water taken from seeps where the canopy was thickest. Waste buried deep and scattered with crushed fern. They taught me signals. One knock meant stop, two meant move, three meant hide, a palm pressed down meant silence. Fingers fluttering meant eyes up, something overhead. When I obeyed, they relaxed. When I forgot, they corrected me with a touch, never a strike. And I began to notice what they didn't want me to notice. Human trash, hidden in their own way. A rusted battery pack under a root. Nylon cord knotted wrong. A syringe cap deep in a clay jar. The village wasn't just hiding from hikers, it had been invaded. One afternoon, the lean one led me beyond the huts to a cleft in rock I'd assumed was just shadow. Inside, the air turned cold and still. I followed on hands and knees until the tunnel widened into a chamber lined with stone shelves. On the shelves were bundles wrapped in hide. He unwrapped one and revealed objects arranged with terrible care: a laminated ID badge, latex gloves, a small aluminum case stamped with numbers, and a square device with an antenna stub. Tracking gear. He tapped the device, then pointed to my chest, then to the sky, then made the clamp gesture again, harder. Close it or they'll open you. Then he pulled out a final bark page, darker than the others, and set it in my hands. It was a map of the valley and the seam, drawn with precision that made my cartographer's heart stutter. Beside the seam was a date mark, 11 circles, then a slash, then 4, and under it, the open eye, drawn inside a cage. The date mark sat in my head like a second heartbeat. 11, 4, and the eye inside the cage. I tried to ask what it meant, but the lean one only touched my mouth, then my ribs, then the stone shelves, memory, not speech. Days became weeks. Weeks became the first winter. Snow turned the bowl into a hush that swallowed footsteps, and I learned why they built low and dark. Winds skated over the canopy while the village stayed still, warm as a burrow. They moved like weather, never fighting it, always folding into it. My job, without anyone calling it that, became the same as theirs: map what can't be seen. I watched the elder female trace roots with a charred stick on bark, not for art but for survival, where meltwater hides, where rock absorbs sound, where a ridge blocks a lens from above. She didn't lead with shouting, she led with gestures, with looks, with the quiet certainty that everyone else followed. They fed me slowly, carefully, as if my hunger might make noise. Dried meat pressed between stones, crushed berries stored in cold pits, roots that tasted like pepper and dirt. When I offered my filter, they accepted it, but never let it leave their sight. Tools were useful, but tools also had a history. The deputy's eyes stayed on the seam. Every time the sky cleared, he watched for aircraft as if rescue would drop from it like a rope. The village watched him the same way they watched a nervous deer. One morning he was gone. No struggle, no blood. Only his boot prints stopping at the edge of a braided path, erased after, as if the forest itself had swept. I never saw him again. I didn't ask because I understood the rule. Questions are also a kind of pulling. By spring, I could read most of their signals. 1 knock, freeze. 2, move. 3, vanish. A fist held low, danger on the ground. Fingers fluttering upward, danger in the air. A flat palm across the throat, no sound, no breath, becomes stone. The first time I obeyed fast enough, the elder female pressed her forehead to mine for half a second, approval and warning in one touch. Year 1 ended with my beard grown wild and my calendar gone meaningless. Year 2 began with a new name for me in their mouths, a sound like K, paired with the open eye symbol. Watcher, keeper, not hunter. They showed me things they didn't show the deputy. a nursery hollow where smaller ones slept under woven screens, a cache cave where human objects were stacked by type, metal with metal, glass with glass, as if categorizing reduced their power. And deeper still, the archive chamber, where bark pages recorded seasons of hiding and seasons of loss. The pages that haunted me most weren't drawings of giants. They were drawings of people, men with packs, men with rifles, men with boxes that blinked, always the same, an eye symbol on the trees, then the rotor shape in the sky, then a crossed out line where a hut used to be. Proof of intelligence wasn't in their hands. It was in their grief being organized. Summer of year 3, the lean one led me to the ridge above the bull at dusk. He placed my palm on a stone that held heat from the day and pointed to the horizon. The air was clear. Stars were starting to show. For a moment, it felt almost normal. Then a light appeared over the canopy. White, steady, not a star, moving too slow. It glided, stopped, and drifted back as if searching. The lean one's fingers fluttered upwards, danger in the air, and beneath that light, something else blinked once, small and red, like a heartbeat answering ours. The elder female appeared beside us soundlessly. She didn't stare at the light, she stared at my hands, then tapped my empty shirt pocket where a notebook would be. The first month I tried to keep notes, she took the pencil, snapped it, and buried the pieces in separate pits. Later, I understood. Anything I carried out could become a thread, and threads get pulled. They erase threads like a trade. After every pass, someone brushed the ground with cedar fans. Broken branches were broken in threes so it looked like wind. Human trash was hidden where boots never step, then recorded on bark so it could be checked again. Nothing forgotten. Nothing allowed to point back. The white light brightened, dimmed, then held steady. A thin electronic chirp floated down. The lean one went rigid and made the clamp gesture, tight and urgent. The light stopped over the bowl, and from inside the village, a second chirp answered, closer, right beneath us. The answering chirp came from inside the bowl, from somewhere no outsider should have been able to plant a device. The elder female grabbed my wrist and pulled me down the backside of the ridge. No running. Running makes noise. We slid, stepped, and melted into a lane that hadn't existed 10 seconds earlier, braided branches lifting just enough to let bodies pass. Below, the village was already folding itself away. Screens dropped, bundles vanished, the ground swept in fast, silent strokes. The chirp sounded again, closer, steadier. I saw the source for one flashing beat, a tiny red blink under a hut's eave like an insect eye. One of them, one of theirs, had missed it before, or someone had placed it while we slept. A ripple of signals went through the community. 3 knocks, vanish, a flat palm across the throat, no sound. The children were guided into roots in rock pockets. Adults became shadows pressed into shadow. And then, from the timberline beyond the seam, human voices drifted in. Grid 2, move up. A man's voice, calm and trained. Copy, keep the canopy in sight. Another, remember, no shots unless ordered. No shots unless ordered. That wasn't a weekend hunter. That was a team. I tasted metal in my mouth. I'd been gone from my world for years, but those voices spoke a language I knew. Procedure. The elder female angled me toward a low tunnel under a fallen cedar. We crawled, belly to needles, until the tunnel opened behind a screen of moss. From there, I could see through the lace of branches without being seen. 5 figures moved in a staggered line at the far edge of the bowl, just inside the invisible boundary. Dark clothing, helmets or caps, packs with rigid frames. One carried something long and matte, rifle maybe, but held low. Another held a device up in both hands like a camera, but bulkier. A third swept the ground with a wand and paused every time it chirped. The chirp. They weren't lost, they were homing. The lead woman raised her fist. Everyone stopped. She pointed at a tree marked with 3 old slashes and smiled like she'd found a street sign. Then she took a roll of tape from her pocket, bright orange, my world's color, and tore off a strip. The elder female's hand clamped my shoulder, hard. Her eyes were black glass. Do you understand now? The woman with the tape didn't tie it the way hikers do. She tied it high, visible, careless, a marker for a return. The man with the wand turned slightly and the device chirped faster. He followed the sound 2 steps toward the huts that no longer looked like huts. He stopped at the spot where the red blink hid and knelt, reaching under the eave. The lean one was already there, unseen. I felt him before I saw him, a presence like tension in a wire. His fingers lifted a flat stone from the ground, and in one motion he set it down again, perfectly. The ground shifted, the hut's shadow changed by an inch. The kneeling man frowned. He reached farther, and his fingers brushed empty air. The red blink was gone. The chirp stopped. Signal dropped, the man whispered. The lead woman didn't curse. She smiled again, slow. That means we're close. She motioned, and two of them peeled off, moving toward the heart of the bull with the confidence of people who'd rehearsed this in daylight. One carried a small cylinder with a cap. The other had zip ties clipped to his vest. My stomach turned. Capture tools. The elder female pressed her forehead to mine, one sharp touch, then pointed, not at the humans, but at a dark cut in the rock wall behind the farthest hut. I'd assumed it was a shadow seam. Now I saw it was shaped, disguised, a place they didn't show me, a place they'd kept even from their keeper. She took my hand and guided it to my pocket, to the carved eye stone. Then she drew the eye in the air and with the same finger traced a rectangle, door, then made the clamp gesture, tighter than ever. Behind us, the bull stayed unnaturally still, as if the whole valley was holding a single breath. Even the mist seemed pinned in place. From the line of intruders came the faint click of a radio keying up, then a soft, satisfied laugh. Somewhere above, the white light paused, listening too. The humans were almost to the first lane. The elder female tugged me toward the rock seam. As we moved, I realized the final terror wasn't that they'd find the village. It was that the village had an answer for being found, and I was about to see what it cost. She pulled me into the rock seam just as the first human boots stepped onto the packed lane. Inside, the air changed. The forest smell died, replaced by cold stone and damp mineral breath. A narrow passage angled downward, its walls rubbed smooth by countless shoulders. They had carved this route with patience, then hidden it with moss and shadow so perfectly my mapmaker's eye had missed it for years. We moved without light. They didn't need it. Fingers brushed the wall in places that guided us around low teeth of rock. Behind us, somewhere in the bowl, a voice murmured, "I've got tracks. No, wait, they're gone." The seam widened into a chamber that stole sound. Not a cave, an engineered hollow. Stone shelves ringed the room like a library. On them sat bundles wrapped in hide, bark stacks bound with cord, and objects laid out in lines that felt like evidence in an investigation. The elder female pressed my palm to the floor. It wasn't dirt. It was clay packed hard, stamped with shallow prints. Hands, feet, and the open eye symbol repeated in a circle. A boundary. A vow. She handed me a bark page I'd never seen. The charcoal was darker, the strokes sharper. It showed the bowl from above, but not as a simple valley, more like a target. Lines radiated outward, dots marked ridges, and above it all hovered a shape like an insect with four blades and a dangling tail. Then the page changed. A long, thin object fell from the insect, drawn as a needle. It struck the ground. After that, three figures, human, appeared, pulling a net. My chest tightened. Darts, I whispered, thinking of tranquilizers used on bears. The elder female's eyes didn't blink. She drew a finger across her forearm, then pointed at the needle. Not sleep. Something taken. She guided me to the far wall where a flat slab of stone stood upright. Carved into it were marks like tally lines, but grouped in patterns. Each group ended with the cage eye symbol. She touched one set, then another, counting with her fingers. 1, 2, 3, too many. From a side niche, she pulled a small aluminum case, the kind I'd seen wildlife biologists carry. The lid was dented. A label in faded ink read, "Specimen. Tissue." She placed it in my hands and watched my face for recognition. My stomach turned. This wasn't mythology. This was collection. A tremor shivered through the stone. Rotor wash. Closer now. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The elder female lifted her hand and every shape in the chamber froze, listening. Above, the intruders moved somewhere in the bowl, and the white light outside brightened, then dimmed, like an eye squinting through leaves. The lean one appeared beside me, silent as a thought. He set a new bark page down, and for the first time I saw their fear drawn not as chaos, but as a system. On the page was a man in a helmet pointing at a screen. On the screen, an outline of the village, glowing. Next to the screen, the open eye symbol. Next to that, a line of numbers in human style, coordinates. "They can see us," the drawing said, "even when we vanish." The elder female took a piece of charcoal and drew my face again, then drew a line from me to the outside world. She paused, then split the line in two paths. One ended at a figure walking away alone. The other ended at the village, the eye symbol pressed over it like a seal. Choice again, but deeper now. Not just stay or go, be the seal, or break it. Above, a sharp metallic clack echoed, something being set down on stone. Then a voice, muffled but excited. Found a void. This wall's wrong. The elder female's hand closed around my wrist, and she led me to a final bundle on the lowest shelf. She unwrapped it slowly, like opening a wound. Inside was a hiking boot, one of the missing kids' boots, cut clean through the laces. Beside it lay a strip of orange tape tied in the same knot the child had shown me, and a small, black, blinking dot that had just started to chirp again. The lean one crushed the blinking dot, but the sound had already done its job. Above us, boots shifted. A tool whined, metal biting stone. The seam was no longer a secret, it was a target. The elder female shoved the open eye stone into my palm and pressed a hidden notch in the slab. Stone slid aside, revealing a black slot. Cold air breathed out, carrying a faint scent of soap and plastic. Human. She tapped my chest once, pointed into the slot. Go, now. Outside, a man said clear as day. Get the wedge in. We're opening this. Stone scraped above us, slow and deliberate, like a lid being pried off a box that should stay buried. The elder female pushed me towards the black slot. I dropped to my knees and crawled in. It wasn't a tunnel so much as a throat. Smooth walls, colder air, the faint stink of soap and machine oil. Behind me, the chamber sealed itself. I heard a soft thud, then nothing, as if the stone had swallowed sound. The passage angled downward for maybe 20 yards, then leveled into a crawl space just high enough to drag a body through without scraping skin. My headlamp stayed off. I moved by touch, one palm sliding along the right wall, counting changes in texture the way you count steps in fog. Above, the whine of metal rose again. A wedge hammered. Human voices echoed through stone. Keep pressure, don't crack it. Thermal's clean down here. No heat signatures. Then they're deeper, or they moved. Moved, like equipment. The crawl space ended at a vertical drop. I felt for holds and found carved notches, old, worn, made for hands. I climbed down into a narrow shaft that smelled of wet clay and old leaves. At the bottom, my fingers brushed a mat of moss. I lifted it and discovered daylight, a slit between boulders that opened into a ravine choked with ferns. I slipped out and froze. The village bowl was above and behind me, hidden by folds of rock. From here I could hear it happening. Not panic, not screams, work. Branches snapping softly in controlled breaks. Bundles thumping into pits. Cedar fans brushing ground. The sound of a whole community becoming invisible. Then, cutting through it, a new noise. A hard electronic beep, repeated in a tight rhythm. A locator. I crept up the ravine wall until I could see the seam area through the trees. 3 humans stood at the rock face, one holding a small tablet-like screen. Another had a coil of rope. The third held a canister with a nozzle, as if ready to spray foam into cracks. The tablet holder smiled. There, void expands 2 meters. We've got a cavity. His partner raised a radio. Team B, push to my marker. Eyes on canopy. If anything moves, tag it. Tag it. Like a trail. I backed away, heart punching my ribs, and nearly collided with the lean one. He was there without being there, eyes fixed on the human devices. He touched my shoulder once. Stay low. Then pointed toward the ridgeline where the white light hovered. The aircraft wasn't a full helicopter now. Smaller, quieter. A drone. Gliding, pausing, listening. The lean one reached into a hide pouch and pulled out a lump of dark resin wrapped in bark. He pressed it into my hand, then mimed throwing. Bait. Distraction. Before I could refuse, he slipped forward through brush and became part of it. A minute later, the resin arced into the open, landing with a wet smack on a flat stone near the seam. The smell hit instantly, sharp, musky, like something alive. The men snapped their heads up. What the hell is that? Movement at 12. I've got it. The drone's light swung, searching. Its beam lanced through the canopy towards the ravine, toward me. I flattened into mud, praying the woven branches above still fooled the lens. The tablet holder spoke into his radio, excited now. Contact. Repeat. Possible contact. Bringing the drone lower. The beam tightened. Leaves trembled. The air filled with a thin, rising whir as the drone descended through gaps that weren't supposed to exist. And from behind me, from the direction of the hidden bowl, came 3 knocks in rapid succession. Vanish. Followed by a 4th sound I had never heard before. A deep, unified pulse, as if the whole valley had decided to close its fist. The pulse rolled through the ground and mist rose, not drifting, but pushed upward like breath. Branches flexed, weaving tighter, closing the gaps the drone needed. The beam jittered, then caught my buckle's glint. I shoved it into mud until it vanished. At the seam, a crack sounded, rock moving. The humans had opened a gap. The lean one appeared beside me and pressed two fingers to my wrist. Now. He pointed to the ravine mouth, my exit, then back to the seam where the men were stepping into darkness. I understood then. The village wasn't only hiding, it was pulling them into a place that would erase them the way it erased tracks. The drone's beam slid over the ravine wall and stopped on the patch of mud where my hands were. The whir rose. From the tablet speaker came synthetic chirp. Target acquired. The drone's beam pinned the mud where my hands had been, and the synthetic chirp kept repeating like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I didn't run. Running is a confession. I sank lower, pressed my face into wet earth, and waited for the next sound. It came from the seam, a human shout, cut short, followed by a hollow boom, as if the mountain had coughed. The valley answered with that same deep pulse. 1, 2, 3, spreading through roots and stone. Mist surged up again, thicker, colder, pushed from hidden vents like breath from lungs. The beam jittered, the drone whirred, fought the rising fog, and for a second I saw it clearly. A small gray insect with a camera eye, trying to stare through a forest that refused to be seen. The lean one touched my wrist once, stay, and slipped away. I never saw him move, I only felt the absence he left behind. At the seam, the tablet holder stepped into the dark gap with his shoulder light on. I saw the cone of white cut across rock, then bend strangely, swallowed, as if the light hit water. The second man followed, rope in hand. The lead woman stayed outside, radio to her mouth, voice tight with excitement. Team B, we're in. Hold perimeter. If you hear anything, mark it. Mark it. Even now, they thought they were the authors. A fourth pulse rolled through the ground, and the air in my throat turned metallic. The drone's camera found nothing but milk-white fog. Its beam swept, paused, then drifted away as if confused. Inside the seam, someone screamed. Not long, not heroic. A single sharp sound that ended like a switch. The lead woman froze. Status? Only static answered. Then another boom, deeper, and the rope in her hand went slack, sliding into the gap as if pulled by weight that didn't want to come back out. That was the village's answer for being found. Not claws, not teeth, terrain. A map that rearranged itself. The elder female appeared at my side as if she'd grown from the moss. She didn't look at the humans. She looked at me. Her hand pressed the carved eye stone into my palm, then closed my fingers around it like a seal. She pointed once toward the ravine mouth. Freedom. Then back toward the bowl. Duty. Choice again. But this time it was final. If I left now, the story would live in me alone, and their home might survive a little longer. If I stayed, I could help them erase the last threads the humans had brought in. I thought of the missing kid's boot on the shelf. Thought of orange tape tied wrong. Thought of the way the drone said target acquired, like a verdict. I nodded toward the bowl. We moved without being seen. The village was already gone. Huts collapsed into fallen logs. Lanes brushed back into wild growth. Caches sealed with mud and needles. I helped scatter the only things that could betray them. Bits of plastic, metal tags, fibers from human gloves. Anything that could be traced, cataloged, returned with a bigger team. By dawn, the seam looked untouched. The helicopter light returned, searched, found nothing. On the ridge, the elder female drew one last symbol in the dirt. The open eye, then a line through it. No more watchers. I stayed 11 years because they let me, and because every season proved the same truth. The worst predators carry radios. I learned their rhythms, how to read wind by the taste of sap, how to walk on stones so nothing snaps, how to make my own footprints look like rain damage. They taught me a handful of signs that meant more than words. Safe, sky, hide, family. More than once I tried to keep a journal, to save a coordinate, to be responsible. Each time the elder female made me bury the pages in 3 separate pits and scatter the dirt, because even a scrap can become a map. When they finally sent me out, it wasn't with proof. Proof was a weapon in the wrong hands. They gave me only the eye stone and a route I was allowed to walk once. At the seam, the lean one looked at me like a promise I couldn't keep and tapped my chest. Remember. Then pointed to the sky. I walked until my legs shook. When I turned back, the valley was already absent, like it had never been a place at all. Some nights in city noise, I still hear 3 knocks. Again. I'm telling you this now because the hunt hasn't stopped, it's just gotten quieter. And if you've made it to the end, subscribe, like, and comment I, so I know you understand what it means to guard a secret. Because somewhere in those mountains, something is still watching back,